Hi, this is Brett from Programming. Welcome to the Learn Python Programming for Beginners set of tutorials. In this tutorial, we'll be looking at the concept of variables. So we'll be looking at things like what is a variable, why use variables, and the types of variables that will be at your disposal when programming in Python. And then putting it all into practice, we will define and use some variables. So the question, what is a variable? From my point of view, a variable is kind of like a box that you can store things in. So you put something into a box and you can, at a later stage, get things out of that same box. The box or the variable is given a name to identify it. Defining a variable is done by assigning a value, and the equal sign is used to assign a value. Then the question, why use variables? Well, variables are used to store the results of calculations, but they're also used to access, they are the means to access and manipulate for the subsequent manipulation of objects, or everything that we put into these boxes we want to be able to access at a later date so that we can do things with it, manipulate these objects, these things. Right, this will all start making sense when you see it in practice. So I'm going to open up the Pycharm Ide. Let's go. The Pycharm Ide is the integrated development environment that we installed in the previous tutorial. In the intro screen, I'll click on the tutorial 2 project. This is the project that we created in our previous tutorial, and that should open up quite quickly. We get this tip of the day dialog, which we will close. Then go to the Tools menu and click on the Run Python console. Right, different variable types. This is going to be a whirlwind tour of some of the most important variable types within Python. We will first look at numbers, then we will look at strings, which is basically text enclosed in quotes, and then we will look at a compound data type, and in this case we will look at the list data type. A list being perhaps one of the most useful and powerful data types that you will come across in Python, and you will use them extensively in your Python program. So let's have a look at numbers. Numbers basically come in two types of numbers. You have integers, which are whole numbers, and then you have floating point numbers. For reference sake, floating point numbers are numbers that contain a fractional part. That is, they contain a decimal point with numbers after it. But first, let's look at integer numbers. I'm going to create a variable width equals 5. Here you can see that I'm creating a variable. I'm calling it width. I'm using the equals sign to actually assign this value of 5 to it. So if you think in terms of boxes, I've created a box, I've given the box an identifier of 5, and I've put this value 5 into the box. So now I want to get that value out of the box. So I can just type in the name of the variable to do that, width 5. I'll create another variable, height equals 10, and retrieve whatever I put into that box, height 10. And now I want to do something with these two variables. I want to calculate the surface area, so I will do something like that. I'll create another variable, equals width times height. In Python, to multiply, in the majority of programming languages, to multiply you use the asterisk. So area equals width times height. So let's see what area now contains, 50. So yeah, you can see I created a variable, I called it width, I assigned the value of 5 to it. I did the same here with height, assigned the value of 10 to it. And here the area variable is basically the value of the area variable is the result of this calculation, width times height. Let's move on. Like I said, whirlwind tour. Let's move on to floating point numbers. I'm going to do some tax calculations with value-added tax calculations. So I'm going to create a variable, a net price variable, 9.99, assign the floating point value of 9.99 to it. Then I'm going to have a tax rate variable. We will have a 20% tax rate. And now I want to calculate the gross price, which is basically the net price with tax applied to it. Gross price equals net price times 1 plus the tax rate. let's see what the gross price is. 11.988. It's come back with 3 decimals. I want to show you the gross price with 2 decimals. I'm going to be using a Python function to do that. Don't worry if you don't understand the concept of functions. The point here is that I just want to show you that you can do things with variables. So I'm going to pass in the gross price variable to a function to actually return the gross price rounded to 2 decimal points. So I use the round function in Python to do that. So I pass in, as the first parameter to that function, I pass in gross price, the gross price variable, and the second parameter to that function will be 2 because I want it to return 2 decimals, 2 numbers after the decimal point. So round gross price, and here it gives back 11.99. So I've calculated the gross price based on this net price variable and based on this tax rate variable. Right, the next type of variable that we're going to be looking at is strings. And like I said, basically a string is text enclosed in quotes. So I'm going to do something like this. You can see the Pycharm Ide when I type a quote, it automatically inserts the closing quote for me and puts the cursor in between the 2 quotes. But anyway, let's go for something like this. Brett, my name. So now I have a variable of type string, and I can do a lot of things with strings, but we're just going to scratch the surface. Let's have a quick look at the things we can do. A string is an example of a sequence type in Python. Basically, a string is a sequence of characters. So let's see what we can do. I can do things like this. I can access the individual characters that make up a string. So for example, if I want to access the first character in the string, I can do something like that. So between square brackets, I put in the index. Keep in mind that you always have to start to get the first character or the first element in a sequence type. You start with 0 and not with 1. So A0 should bring back B, A1 should bring back R. I can also use negative indexes, and then I will go in the other direction. So I wouldn't start here, I would actually start from the other side of the string. So I can do something like this as well, -1, and that should bring back a T. Right, strings are a very powerful type in Python. You can do a lot of things with them. I'm just going to show you a couple of things. So I can do stuff like a dot, and you can see as soon as I type in the dot, the Pycharm IDE provides code completion, even in the console, not only when I'm actually typing in the actual source code. So it's showing me all of the things I can do with strings, all of the methods that I can call on strings. So I'm going to do something like this. Now let's first do upper. So I'm going to uppercase all of the letters, all of the characters, the individual characters in the string. So I can do lower as well, as we saw. I can do things like replace, a dot replace. Let's replace, for example, the T with, for example, K. And we should get back something like this, break. Now, it's important to note here that I'm not actually changing the underlying variable. Strings are an example in Python. Strings are an example of an immutable data type. So I'm not actually changing the underlying variable. So if I type an A, you'll see that it's still Brett and not break. If I want a string with a break, for example, I would actually have to create a new variable. So I would do something like this. B equals A dot replace T with K. So now you can see B is break, but A is still the original string Brett. I can also do things like this. Again, this is because strings are also sequence types. I can do quite cool things like this. T in A. So I'm basically asking, does the character T, is it present in the string Brett? True. So if I do something like this in A, it should come back as false because Y is not present in the string Brett. Right, those were strings. Now we will move on to lists. Lists are used to group together other values. They are comma separated values between square brackets, and lists can also contain different types. So let's see what this looks like in practice. So I'm going to create a list variable, s equals, again you can see I'm using the equal sign to actually assign a value to a variable. The variable in this case I'm going to just give it the name of s, square brackets, and then a list of comma separated elements, 1 2 3 4 4 5. So there you go, I've got S. Again, think of S as this box, and I've created a box, I've given it a name, and I've put into this box some stuff, and in this case that stuff is a list of other values, 1 2 3 4 5 in this case. Lists, just like strings, are sequence types, so I can do just like I did with strings, I can access the individual elements. So I can do S0, S1, I can do slicing, what's called slicing, so I can access a slice within the list. So I can do something like this: from the first element return me 3. So there you go. Lists, you can do a lot of things with lists. I'll show you very briefly what you can do with lists. Let's have a look at s dot. Again, you have this code completion popping up. Append, let's do something like append 2. Let's have a look, and there you can see 1 2 3 4 5, and then I've appended to the end of the list another value, another integer, in this case 2. And this is where it's important to understand the difference between strings and lists. In this respect, strings are immutable, i.e. you don't actually change the original variable, string variable, but lists are mutable. So you can see when I did s.append 2, the actual underlying variable did change. So you can see I got now 1 2 3 4 5 2. I want to remove that, and because it's the last value, I can do something like this: spop, give me back the last value in the list. So it's going to give me back 2. But importantly, if I look now at the list variable s, you can see it's gone back to 1 2 3 4 5. I can reverse strings. So s 5 4 3 2 1, the underlying variable, a list variable, has been changed, it has been reversed. So let's reverse it again to get back our original list s. So again, it's mutable. You can do stuff when you actually apply these methods to lists. They change the actual list. Just like with strings, I can, because again a list is a sequence type, I can do stuff like 3 in s, true, but 7 in s should bring back false. So like I said, a whirlwind tour of the different variable types in Python. We had a look at numbers, specifically integers, and then we had a look at floating points. Then we started looking at strings, strings being immutable, strings being sequence types. I can access the individual elements. I can call different methods on these string variables. And basically the same with lists. Lists, you assign, or you create a list by assigning between square brackets comma separated elements. One other thing that I think it's quite interesting, lists can contain elements. They don't have to be all of the same type. So here I've used elements and they were all of the same types. They were all integers. But I could also do something like this. So we have the list s, but I now want to append, I think, what was my variable? I think it was a. So I want to append that. So s append a. Now look at this. I have appended the variable which contained the string Brett. I appended the variable a containing the string Brett to the s variable, which was this list 1 2 3 4 5 Brett. So lists don't have to contain, the values that they contain don't have to be all the same, and that makes the list, it's one, it's a very powerful, and two, it's a very versatile data structure, and you'll be using it all the time in your Python programs. So that was, like I said, a whirlwind tour of Python variables and different variable types. In our next tutorial, we'll be looking at flow control, basically making decisions and looping. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope to see you or have you back for my next tutorial. Thank you and goodbye.